Welcome to week 2 of our course. This week we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in our early childhood programs. The first part we will talk about accommodations for children with special needs, and the second part we'll talk about diversity in our programs, both culturally and linguistically. So the United States as a whole is really becoming more diverse. According to the latest census, which was 2010, 44% of preschool children, so that's ages 3 to 5 in America, are members of minority groups. And then by 2050, that number is going to be 62%. So we need to reflect the diversity that's across the United States, and then we also need to reflect the diversity of our cultural and linguistic needs of the children in our area, which is our U.S.-Mexico border region, the Southern California area. Because programs that serve children and reflect the needs of their children and the needs of their community really help to support and close the achievement gap for children. So that's really why we're doing this, is so that we can support all the children in our program equally. So when we're talking about inclusion of children with special needs, and families who have children with special needs, we're going to be looking at the IDEA, which is the federal law for Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And this affects us in two ways: an IEP, which is an individualized education plan for children over the age of 3, and an IFSP for children who are under the age of 3. And you can Google any of these terms and it'll give you a bunch of definitions. But if you run a child development center that works with infants all the way through to kindergarten or school age program, then you're going to deal with IEPs and IFSPs. Typically, these programs, just these plans, are talking about the services that they will receive within the public school, and those are usually therapies. Some children with more significant delays like cerebral palsy or autism will receive services through the county or the state as well. But for children over the age of 3, those are within centers or public schools, and then for children under 3, those are at home. So therapies are not usually provided within your ECE program, but you might have to do some kind of accommodations. A child with a wheelchair is going to have aisles widened so that they can get through. A child with a speech delay is going to have a picture schedule so that they can communicate what they need throughout the day. So those are kind of examples of how an IEP and an IFSP might inform what you do within a classroom. So if a child is enrolled in your program and they have a officially diagnosed special need, I always ask to see the IEP or the IFSP, and I sit down with the parents and we discuss the goals. Sometimes therapists will come along with the parents. Home visitors or early interventionists, and I've done this a lot in the past, will also accompany the family, and we'll talk about the program, talk about the physical environment, and any accommodations that need to be made. So once again, to kind of wrap this up real fast, children have plans, and that details the kind of education they're going to have in the public schools. And this includes therapies and ABA therapies and stuff like that. As an ECE provider, you're supporting those goals in your program, and you need to involve a wide range of professionals and the parents in how you accommodate the child. So I want to talk inclusion of our employees and our staff members. So the ADA, which is another federal law, is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this prohibits discrimination on the basis of a disability in your employment, and that's really what kind of affects us as possible employers or people who are already employers or work within a group and you supervise somebody who has special needs. It also touches on public accommodations, commercial facilities, and things like that, but we're really looking at the employment side because we are going to be talking about employee contracts later on. So keep in mind that you do need to include employees. And really what this comes down to is reasonable accommodation is made for employees physically, emotionally, cognitive, any kind of special needs like that. If they can fulfill the requirements of their job within reasonable means and bounds, then that person needs to be employed, and you cannot discriminate against them. Years ago, I had an employee who had something of a processing disorder. I'm not going to go into any specifics or give away who this person was. She was a very good caregiver of toddlers, and her special need really just had to come down with needing time and space whenever there was going to be a change. So if there was going to be a policy change, a scheduling change, anything like that, we needed to communicate in two ways. We needed to do it by writing and then also verbally, and over a certain amount of time. It wasn't like a quick 5-minute discussion of how our curriculum was going to change or that her shift was going to change, something like that. We typically would do it with 2 managers, and we would sit down and we would write very clearly how the program was going to change and what her roles and responsibilities were going to be. So it was very clearly delineated. You know, if she was working an 8 to 5, we were now changing her to a 7:30 to 4:30. When she came in, what would be her duties? How would that be changed? And then she would typically need to come back for a follow-up meeting, both so she could ask questions that she might not have thought about in the first meeting, and then also for us to make sure that we could really clarify what her roles and responsibilities were, either with a staff change, time change, or curriculum change, and make sure she understood what we needed from her and how the program was going to change. So that's an example of somebody who was a fantastic employee and a really great with children, and she just needed a little bit of accommodation in order to kind of understand when things changed. So 2 slides back, I talked about IEPs and IFSPs, and I wanted to circle back to that again because I wanted to talk about how ECE programs would make accommodations using those plans. So I kind of have three examples of different age groups and how an ECE program would accommodate their special needs. So for example, a 4-year-old, and this is my own 4-year-old I'm talking about, she's now 6, but when she was 3 and 4, she received 30 minutes of speech therapy twice a week in a group at a public school site, and me and my husband traded off taking her on days that we were off. And then the other 2 days she attended a part-day preschool somewhere else, so it was a Montessori preschool. So she needed to work on her articulation, so she worked with another child who had similar issues and not pronouncing sounds, and she did this at her local elementary school. And then on the other days she went to a part-day preschool so that I could go to work. My second example is from a few years ago when I worked with an infant with Down syndrome. So at home, he received early intervention, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. And he also went to an early childhood education program for 30 hours a week as both of his parents worked. We were given a lot of guidance by the parents in how to position their child for optimal learning. So for example, he really needed split pants, and if you've worked with children with Down syndrome, they have very low muscle tone, and they have a tendency to widen their legs as a base of support when sitting. And so children need to be positioned so that they can keep their legs closer together, which kind of activates the right muscles so that they can continue to grow and learn and work with that low muscle tone that they're going to have for the rest of their lives. There are other positioning things, and as he got older, early interventionists and home visitors and therapists came out with the parents to kind of look at our program and give us suggestions on ways that we could support the goals from the IEPs at our program, because he was with us 30 hours a week. So we couldn't really ignore the fact that he had low muscle tone or speech issues developed later on. So we needed to make accommodations in each age level that he was in, and with the help of the family and some early interventionists, we were able to make those changes really easily. And then I also worked with a 3-year-old who had a global developmental delays, so speech, social and emotional, and then physical, affecting both his fine motor and his gross motor abilities. So when he started, he started off in a family child care center. He went there 0 to 3, and he got his early intervention and therapies at home after the work day. Once he turned 3, though, he transitioned to the school district, and his therapies were provided there during a part-day preschool. So he went to preschool every day, and they worked on all of his goals and his therapies through the public school system. But this left a gap in the day, so his FCC provider provided before and after care. So she needed to be aware of what the program was doing at the public school so she could support those goals. And she was also doing a service for the families by picking him up and sometimes taking him to his part-day public school where he was able to get his therapies. So we're kind of going to be looking at this idea of a universal design for learning, and it's a way to accommodate and provide adaptations for children with special needs. And really what this is starting at the beginning of our program, which is our curriculum design, and making sure that diverse learners of every age and ability and diversity level are met with their needs from the very beginning. So instead of going from the back and working our way forwards, saying, okay, we have a child with special needs, what can we do at the back end? We're starting from the front end and saying our curriculum should meet a variety of learners. So we're not just going to teach in one way, we're going to teach in a lot of needs so that their needs can be met. Part of this is also working within a multidisciplinary team, and I spoke about that kind of on the last part about coming out to programs and evaluating and working with them so that the child could be positioned correctly. So program directors and teachers need to be aware of any needed accommodations in a classroom, but if the curriculum is designed to meet the needs of different learners from the beginning, accommodations will be much more easier and much more feasible for a program. So I'm going to talk about a process that I went through as an early interventionist a couple years ago. We had a child who had significant developmental delays, but they primarily affected him physically, so very low muscle tone as well. So he was attending a private preschool at age 3. This was his first time out of the home. Before, he had care by a nanny while his parents worked because he walked very late after the age of 2, while also getting therapy within the home. So as the early interventionist, I met with the parents and the program director before he even started with the preschool. And the first thing that we did was we widened the aisleways so that his arm crutches, and he also wore braces on his feet. It allowed for him more space to accommodate his physical environment. We also decided that when he first entered care, it was going to be in a smaller group, which was actually a younger group. And this was just for a very short amount of time. He had some cognitive delays, but it was mostly gross motor. We needed him to more easily navigate the playground and the chairs. For example, getting on and off chairs, he had real issues with trunk support and control, so his abs and his stomach were very weak, and so getting onto a chair that didn't have arms was very difficult for him. So that was something that myself and the physical therapist worked on for quite a while. We also worked on him being able to navigate the preschool that was for age 3. So he was in a much younger group, learning how to walk in a line, to walk with his braces on sidewalks, things like that. And then meanwhile, we would take him out and we would introduce him to the playground that was for the 3-year-olds, because he needed to learn how to go up and down stairs, how not to go down slides. And we needed to make some accommodations to those playgrounds, adding blocks to the tricycles so that he could put his feet on them and try to push them. And then they also really nicely changed out one of the swings because his trunk did not allow him to sit on a swing and be pushed. He would fall out of it. So they installed a different type of swing as well. Once he understood the routine and he had more gross motor and motor planning ability to navigate his physical environment, then we worked on some communication skills, which included a lot of pointing and yelling, and a picture schedule was devised. And then he was able to be phased into his age-appropriate classroom with support from myself and the physical therapist. So over a matter of months, we were able to get him ready for school, and he was able to be in the classroom that he needed to be in. So that's just an example of accommodations that were made in a preschool for a child. Now we're going to look at diversity in our early childhood education programs. So I've just kind of put some statistics on this page because this really highlights the diversity of California. And then I talked a little bit about our U.S. border region earlier, but I wanted to just point out that 25% of students in K through 12 are English language learners. And then in states like California, half of the children are from immigrant families. So this really shows the wonderful diversity that we have in the Southern California area. And then we actually serve quite a bit of refugees as well. In my work at Regional Center, some of the families that we serve down in South County include Somali, Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghani families that are immigrants or refugees from some of those countries that are having some issues with war and conflict. So I'm talking a little bit about English as a second language, and for English as second language learners, both families and children. We're in the U.S.-Mexico border region. We are very blessed to have lots of bilingual programs that have bilingual staff. If you look at Rady's Hospital, a wide variety of the doctors, nurses, and program developers are bilingual in order to meet the needs of our Spanish and English communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about accommodations for less common languages or programs that might have limited bilingual staff. So the accommodations that you can make within a program, and then also things to be aware of. The biggest thing to be aware of is that you shouldn't assume to know what somebody's language is by their nation of origin. Not everyone from Mexico or Central America would have grown up speaking Spanish. There are lots of regional dialects and indigenous languages, and so Spanish could be their second language and English their third or fourth. And I also see this within Southeast Asian communities as well, ethnic groups that transverse borders, and they might not speak the language that you associate. Like if a family is from Vietnam, that does not mean that they necessarily speak Vietnamese. Also, don't assume to know what the parent's English proficiency is. You can ask, and most families are very good about letting you know how they learn best or what their English language ability is. For a lot of families, they ask to have more difficult technical questions answered by me in written form so that they can Google translate it or have a family member or a community leader translate it at a different time. So sometimes the transition with Regional Center from in-home care to out-of-home care can be difficult to understand. And we actually have some of the transition guidebooks in different languages so that parents can read through it at their leisure and they can ask questions of us later. Some state and county and federal programs have translators, and it can be on a temporary or one-time basis. I had a colleague at the county who was provided an interpreter for a very uncommon language, and it was difficult to find an interpreter, so they got one for their introduction and then quarterly as well when they had to come up, when they had to meet together and discuss plans and goals for the child, or even when issues arose. So it wasn't every time that the family and my colleague met, but it was enough to try to bridge the gap and have the parents understand what the program was about. A lot of times you're going to need to seek out help from the community. So I had a family from India recently, and they did not speak a very common language. So I asked a bunch of colleagues in my program and in other programs if they spoke the language or they knew anybody who did. And unfortunately, they didn't. So I kind of struck out there. So I went to the next part, which was having family members who can translate. So there was a cousin, and then sometimes the dad who were available by phone. But just kind of be aware that there are strengths and vulnerabilities of using family members to translate. With the family member who either comes to your program or who's available by phone, that's great. It's typically very immediate, like if you need to tell the family, oh, we're having a field trip tomorrow, please bring a car seat. You call them up on the phone and they translate it. But there can be vulnerabilities. They can be wrong or not know what specific words mean, not know the semantics behind it. And then also, if you're using a family member who's a child or a dependent, it really depends on their age and their maturity, their cognitive and linguistic ability. And then also just keep in mind that it can upset the balance of the family dynamic. So when I've had to use children to translate, they're typically teens who have a pretty good grasp on English already, and so they know what words mean and the importance of kind of using the correct words. Using younger children, while necessary, sometimes can really upset the balance of the family dynamic, and it can kind of elevate the child to a position that the parents might not want them to. So just be aware when you're using family members to translate that there can be strengths and vulnerabilities within kind of using this idea. And for one of my last slides, I wanted to talk about creating a diverse and representative ECE program. So we had talked about UDL, or this Universal Design for Learning, a couple slides back, and I wanted to kind of pull it all together within the 7 principles of the UDL and give you an example of a writing center in a classroom and how we could positively represent diverse children and make accommodations for special needs. But first I wanted to talk about the 7 principles. It's equity, or being equitable, being flexible, simple to use, there's clear communication, mistakes are tolerated and even encouraged, and then the last 2 are more for children with special needs. Low physical effort, and it's easy to use regardless of mobility or physical activity. And I would say that these are really applicable to all humans and something that we would want in most educational systems. For example, number 5, mistakes are tolerated and even encouraged. My twin daughters attend a public school here in Oceanside, and that's part of their mission statement, is that failure is just part of the human experience and we learn by making mistakes. And I think that's a really great message for everybody. So as far as the Writing Center example, my first thought, if I was making a Writing Center that conformed to the principles of UDL, first it would have enough space for a wheelchair or a child with crutches to navigate. I would have a big enough round table so that many children could get together. And then I might even have an independent table off to the side for a child who maybe wanted to be alone. I would also have a balance ball or an exercise ball for children who had attention disorders and maybe some sensory needs so that they could sit and bounce. And I would also have, it would be okay to stand up. And standing desks are very in these days as well. I would also have different types of writing utensils, chubby crayons, thin utensils, thin markers, things like that, so that a child with a variety of fine motor needs could access the center as well. There would be writing models in a variety of languages, especially languages that echo what is spoken by the children in the classroom. So if it's Spanish, if it's Arabic, things like that, there would be written models of those languages in order for children to see. And then I would also have a child that I would have each child have a journal with their name and their picture so that they could pick it out and it's their own in the classroom, and that's where they can dictate their own stories, draw their own pictures. So we're really just making sure that all children are included and the accommodations are flexible and responsive to the needs of the children. So that's just a simple way that we could have a variety of accommodations and have positive representation in our writing center. So in conclusion, you as the leader or the manager of your early childhood education program are modeling a process of inclusion and then respect for diversity. And this is really going to resonate in the quality of care that your teachers are going to provide. And that's really what you're doing when you're providing leadership, is you're teaching your staff how to apply these ideas of diversity into quality education for the children in your care. And really embracing a diverse population of children and families in our programs means that our community is strengthened as well. So we typically care for children whose parents are working. And these programs are necessary so that our families can work. They can go to school. They can work on personal goals. They can socialize their children, because in general, we're all trying to attain our own slice of the American dream. And a quality program that includes everybody is helping our families do that.